Okay, we're going to do a Carbi service on a Honda BF90 A2. It will only idle under full choke with the revs raised, and as soon as you bump the revs back down it will stall, or if you try to push the choke in it will stall immediately. So we're going to take the airbox and Carbis and manifold all off as one assembly, starting with all these bolts to remove the manifold, fuel hoses and linkages. Okay, as you can see, I've now taken the throttle cables off, the choke linkages, and I've taken off the fuel hoses from the fuel pump to the Carbis. I've backed off all these bolts holding the manifold. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bolts and 2 nuts. So now I'll have to put the camera down. This whole assembly should lift off as one piece so I can take it to the workbench. Remember, lots of photos. As you can now see, I can just lift that whole assembly straight out. I did end up having to loosen that bracket that holds the acceleration cables, just so that the manifold could come past and lift over that. Before that I couldn't get it out. I also had to lift the top timing cover off just so you could flex that little piece there to get the manifold out, and then it just pops straight out. Okay, so you can see on the removal I damaged the manifold gasket here and here. That's why you get new parts and gaskets, a full set just in case. Okay, this is the completed manifold assembly removed. Take lots of photos. Note the linkages and the up arrow. When you reinstall, this plastic bar will come off. Note the positions of all your screws, particularly these ones on each Carbi. Okay, next step, make sure you have carburetor removal and installation instructions. You have a Honda carburetor manual that will show you specifications. Particularly this page that will show you what you're looking for and what you need to clean. You've got your slow jet, pilot jet. You've got your slow jet tube. And this is the one we're looking for on this engine because it's a BF90. We've got your idle mixture screw. And then you've got your main emulsion tube. These are all things we need to check, replace the seals, and clean out all these tiny little holes. Make sure you've got your gaskets. New manifold gasket, which I ripped. A new air intake gasket. Hang on, there's the part number. There's the part number of the manifold gasket for a Honda BF90 A2. Then we have 4 seal kits for the carburetor, for 4 carburetors. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 8 Carbi gaskets, 2 per Carbi, between the Carbi and the manifold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then, because I was ordering parts, I'm going to do my water pump as well. Not in this video. Part number of that. And then lastly, that's my new impeller. But I'm not worried about that today. Okay, this is the stage I've just completed. That's removing the air filter, carbis and manifold as one unit from the block up here. All these screws are in a separate bag marked manifold. And this is what I'm about to do now. Remove the air filter, intake, manifold to separate the carbis. Okay, I've just turned it back over because before we separate the air box, we're going to make sure all these fuel line tubes are disconnected so that when we undo the bolts here, 4 of them on this side, 4 on the other side, that holds the air intake manifold to the carbis, and the carbis to the manifold itself. So all these fuel lines will need to come undone. Okay, I've now removed the air filter box, which is sitting over here. 4 10mm bolts hold that on and it pops straight off. Lay all your gear out the way it comes off, and that way it'll go back on in the reverse order. So now I need to take off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 10mm bolts. Now these bolts will release this air intake manifold. You can see through 1, 2, 3, 4 carbis, and those bolts will go through 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the other side as well, and then that will release all the carbis. What we're going to do now too is take these linkages off, and they just simply, it's like a little ball joint. Just pop straight off. Like that. Being careful not to bend. There we go. So I'm going to sit that over there. There is little up arrows on the two center ones to show you which way it goes back on. Now this plastic slide and bar, there's little clips that you got to squeeze together underneath, 4 of them, to release that. Okay, now I've squeezed those 4 little clips together, it just pops straight up, and once again sitting that over there in the order I take it off, so that it'll go back in the same order. And now I'll start these 10mm Carbi manifold bolts. I'll just crack them all first. Little socket extension just made that job a lot easier. Okay, I'll just turn it over gently to get to this side. Alright. Okay, I've backed off all the air intake bolts that hold the carbis on, so I'm going to take those out now, lay them all in order. With what I took them out. Bottom ones. Okay. Like I said, lay everything out in the order that you take it out of. Now, if you saw before, air intake manifold, it should just come straight out if I took that last bolt out. And there we go. Set that all over there. Now I've got my 4 carbis. Okay, I've got my number 4 carburetor off, and I'm going to start disassembling that. Once again, instructions for the BG carburetor for a BF90. Okay, so I've backed off the 4 screws on the float bowl. There we go. Do not lose those. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a rubber seal that will remove and replace. sit the float bowl there. You can see it's a rubber gasket meant to be round, and obviously it's quite flattened, so that will be replaced. Okay, this is my float bowl. You can see we've got a few little marks on the bowl on the float here. Okay, my next step will be to remove this little pin here that holds my float and the float valve. Then I'm going to come up here and remove the plug cap, under which will be the main emulsion tube, the slow jet emulsion tube, and there's an O-ring in there that I need to replace as well. Over on the side, this is the primary jet that we'll also remove. And then over here on the side is a main jet. We've got to make sure there's a tiny hole in there that's not clogged up. You can actually see in the bottom of this float bowl, or I'll wipe my finger, just how much white crap's in there. All that needs to be cleaned out. Okay, I'm now going to take out the jets. I've got the float removed. That is the float pin. My float pin on this Carbi is actually pressed in, so it was a little bit difficult to remove. And always make sure you've got a container to clean your parts in. Okay, I've just taken out my main emulsion tube. That came out of the centre there after removing the plug cap. As you can see, there's quite a bit of corrosion on the end, and there's lots of little holes that I should be able to see light through. These two aren't too bad, but there's a hole up this end and it looks completely clogged, so that definitely needs a clean. Now this one is the slow jet emulsion tube. Now I don't know if you can see that, but it is completely covered. Completely covered in corrosion. It's yucky. And once again, there's little tiny holes just above my thumb that you should see light through. I can see light through there, but that's pretty yucky. And that little O-ring on the end will replace that too. Okay, the Carbi is completely disassembled now, all ready to be sprayed down with Carbi cleaner and cleaned up. Here are all my parts I need to clean. I have my float valve, idle mixture screw. There's a O-ring on there we'll replace. This one here is the drain screw with another little O-ring that we'll replace. Here's my fuel bowl that needs a good clean. This is my plug cap. This is my main jet. This is my slow jet emulsion tube. And this one here is a primary jet. And then the main emulsion tube. All these need to be cleaned. Okay, now the Carbi's all taken apart, cleaned, As you can see, there's no white residue in the bottom of the bowl. That's all nice and clean. So we're going to use this seal kit for the BF90 A2. We're going to replace the seal on the Carbi bowl. We're going to place the little rubber O-ring on the slow emulsion tube. We're going to place the rubber seal on the drain screw. We're going to replace the rubber O-ring on the idle mixture screw. So that will be this big one and 1, 2, 3 little ones, and then we'll put it all back together. Okay, Carbi number 4 all cleaned, reassembled. I just got to put the float ball back on. All the new seals are in, and the factory setting for your idle mixture screw is 2 1/4 turns. So start there. Alright, 3 more to go. Okay, all 4 cubbies are cleaned. Number 4 was by far the worst. 1, 2 and 3 weren't too bad. Now I need to reassemble and put it back on the boat and see what happens. Okay, there's the part number. I'm going to put all these gaskets back on. Prior to mounting the Carbis, new gaskets. Okay, Carbis and new gaskets are sitting in place. I now have a new air manifold gasket, which will go on, followed by the air manifold. Okay, as you can see, the Carbis are back on, air filter manifolds on. I'm going to put these linkages back on, which simply snap back into each position. Simple as that. And these ones. And this linkage goes back on with the arrows pointing up. This arrow and this arrow points up. Okay, then we turn it all over. And don't forget to put all these little fuel hoses back on. 4 of them, and then we need to clean this gasket up for a new gasket. I'm ready to go back on the motor. Okay, now I've got the new gasket on, I've got to fit the manifold back on. Motor's back together, and now let's see if it'll start.